Next up, we are going to be sowing our straw flowers. There we go, and a big step back so you can see what I can see. Now, seeds do need to be really fresh for successful germination, and they do need light for germination. So I like to sow one seed, oops, that's stuck, one seed per cell onto the surface of the compost. If you want to, you can sow 2 seeds per cell, and then you can either separate them or just remove the weaker of the 2 later if they both germinate. Personally, I just like to sow 1 seed per cell, and then if I've got any empty cells later on, I'll just add another seed then. There we go, oops. 2, there, perfect. I've been watering this tray ahead of time, but it's not quite hydrated enough, so I've put it back in a tray of water. I don't really want to overhead water it because you could accidentally flick compost over the tiny seeds and plunge them into darkness when they need the light for germination. So I'm bottom watering my tray. Seeds need to be super fresh for successful germination. They need light for germination, so don't cover them, and they also like a warm bottom between 21 and 24 degrees, so either a heat mat or take them into the house. If you don't have a heat mat, I thoroughly recommend that you invest in one, because if you're serious about learning to grow flowers, it literally changes your life. And rather than leaning over your seed tray waiting for everything to pop up, that you can literally cut the germination rate from 3 weeks to 3 days in some cases. I absolutely am passionate about heat mats. There we go, that's so much better. So don't forget your label, and then a clear propagator lid until we see the first signs of germination. You need a recap, and you want to check the germination temperature. It's just here in the Spring Grow-A-Long Handbook. With straw flowers, you will need to be a little bit more patient. This is the 2-week mark, and you can see the seeds germinating here in the tray. And this is the 3-week mark. Whoops, we dropped 3 seeds in that cell. This is the 3-week mark. So once they do get going, they start to grow quite quickly, but that initial germination period, you do need to have a little bit more patience with than something like Cosmos, for example. Stack of 15 cell trays, which are ready for recycling now, and I'm going to put my straw flowers and my zinnias in them. Key to make sure that you do pot plants on when they need it, because if you don't, what can happen is they will get restricted by the size of the cell and then stop growing. I've got an alfresco potting bench today. It's lovely. Don't forget your label. Now I'm going to take them over to the shade now, where I've got a tray of water so they can fully rehydrate. Now you could plant them straight out in the garden. The problem is they're so small and their roots are so small, it would be really easy for them to get fried in the garden. So my advice is to pot them on first. What else can I show you? These are my straw flowers. I've already potted those on into the 15 cell trays. So I'm going to leave them in the greenhouse for a little bit longer, just because it's a bit warmer and they like that. So next we'll do the straw flowers, and I'm just pinching them out with my fingers. You can of course use scissors, but there you go, decapitated. And if you do them as young as this, you barely even notice, because they're too little really to show any kind of visible wound. Planting out my straw flowers today, and I just wanted to show you an example of one I've pinched. There we are, look at that lovely branching, and one I haven't pinched. Now if you haven't pinched yours, don't worry. When the flower blooms, just cut it nice and low down on the stem, and then you should get some branching to occur later. It can be tricky to know where to pinch, but all I literally do is do them when they're really young and pinch out the tips, and then this is what happens. This one is quite small still, so if you just nip in there and just take out the top, it's quite simple, and then it will branch from that point onwards. Making sure that the hole is nice and big, so that they're able to push their roots out into the surrounding soil and anchor themselves in. And then, because it's been intermittently hot and then windy, I am just planting them slightly deeper than I normally do, just to make sure that they're really well anchored in. Look at these straw flowers, they are absolutely incredible. Beautiful white perfect for weddings. So I'm going to pick a few for my bouquet. As garden decoration, they're absolutely knockout too. Another benefit of straw flowers is that you can dry them. Now you need to be careful that you don't pick them when they're too mature, because mature straw flowers will continue to open during the drying process and they can turn into quite an ugly dried flower. So you want to pick the young. We will cover it more nearer to the time, and it's also covered in the handbook. But I'm going to show you now some straw flowers that I picked and dried years ago. And if anything, they have improved with age, like a fine wine. They've got this kind of vintage look to them now. So as promised, here are some straw flowers that I dried earlier. Now you never guess how long ago that was. 4 years ago. These are 4 years old. Isn't it incredible? So they really are everlasting flowers. I've taken the stems away because they're not very attractive, and I do like to wire them if I'm going to be using them in bouquets or arrangements. These are best wired fresh. There's a video on my website showing you how to do this. But other than that, super easy. You just dry them, keep them away from direct sunlight, and in 4 years' time you will have a beautiful tray of vintage flowers as well. What I'm going to do with these is I've stripped off the lower foliage, because obviously as they dehydrate that can look messy, so I'm stripping that off now where it's easy to do, and then I'm going to turn the flowers upside down in the house, and then what that does is that keeps the flower stems straight while they dry. If you try and dry them upright, then what can happen as they dehydrate, the flower heads are heavier than the stems can cope with and they might bend, and we don't want that.